Hi, thanks for joining me for this video. It's going to be short but important because we are talking about conflict again. And this is really just an exercise guide for you. We've talked about conflict in winter and we are talking about conflict again in spring. In this exercise, it's really important that we understand what your conflict response is. So if you think about your family of origin, think about what you learned about conflict growing up. What did you understand conflict to be? How was it in your family? Like, how was your response when somebody came at you? So if your parent came at you angry and very aggressively, what was your response? Did you fight back? Did you run away? Did you flee? Were you frozen? What did you do in that environment? How were your parents or caretakers in conflict with you? Because what we learned about conflict with our families of origin really determine how we understand conflict in the world. If it was a safe place to be angry, or if it was a safe place to express ourselves, we will have one very clear path of conflict understanding. If it was unsafe for us to be angry, if our parents were raging, or if they were abusive, or there was any trauma, we have a very different understanding of conflict. And it could be activating feelings we hadn't felt in a long time. So it's really important for you to understand your conflict relationship. And so when we're in spring, we can start unpacking a little bit of that. We cannot do it in winter, right? You cannot be out in a blizzard with a shovel and a bag of seeds trying to plant some zucchini. It's not going to happen. It really needs to be in a time of summer when things are calm and things are back on track with your relationship. You and your partner are building bridges back to each other, that you start to talk about what conflict looks like for you. So in this exercise, there's a huge list in your workbook about what conflict is potentially for you. And so down one side are some typical conflict responses. And then, do you often reply that way? Do you sometimes reply that way? Or do you never reply that way? So if somebody is raising their voice and yelling, right? What is your response if you are hearing that? Or if you are yelling, what is your feelings behind that? So try to break down who you become in conflict, because what we do from that is we start to paint a picture of the patterns and habits that we have learned to navigate conflict. So it might very well be that you don't want to be yelling at your partner, or you don't want to be yelling at your children or yelling at people when you're angry, but you don't know another way. You actually think that's how conflict happens. That's how conflict gets resolved. The strongest, loudest person gets to win, right? There are many people who have that experience, right? The loudest person in their family typically won. They won the argument, or they won the conflict, whatever winning looked like at the time. So in their mind, for me to be the winner, for me to have control, for me to dominate, for it to go my way, I need to be yelling the loudest. I need to be making the biggest commotion, and the other person will give in because I will be powerful. This is not something we think of in our minds, right? We don't go into conflict thinking this. But when you start understanding who you are in conflict, what you learned to be normal in conflict, or what you knew to be, feeling uncomfortable in conflict, then you can start to see who you want to be in conflict. You don't have to be the person that you are. Nothing about your family of origin or your life up until this second is set in stone. Who you are is who you want to be. If you want to behave differently, if you want to have different patterns and behaviors, if you want to have different responses, you need to learn them. That's it. You need to understand the root trigger. You need to replace your reaction with a different reaction, and then you need to practice. You need to have reminders. You need to acknowledge the things that you are doing well. It's a learned behavior, and not everyone learned healthy conflict resolution. So this is really a way in which we can start to have this conversation. Now, there are a lot of resources about this. This is by no means definitive at all. It really just is for those couples who are finding themselves in conflict a lot, or in conflict at this low-grade chronic level that things just keep popping up. Let's get into that, right? Let's break that down a little bit, because we don't want to live there. That's not the relationship of our dreams. It's not. We dread it, right? It is really the dread journey. It is not the dream journey. So we need to flip it and understand, who are we in conflict and who do we want to be? So we need to ask ourselves the uncomfortable questions. And if you write down, I never raise my voice, I never raise my voice. No, I'm not a yeller. And your partner says, oh, but sweetheart, you get really animated and loud and, big arm movements and lots of pointing and you're kind of loud. Take that feedback as, oh, okay, I didn't see it that way. I just thought I was being passionate. Well, you were yelling to get your way. You were yelling over me. You were interrupting me. You often, kind of take over by slamming your hands and kind of quieting me through big actions, right? You can have conversations. It's not a place to be defensive or attacking at all. If it starts, you have to stop. If anybody is feeling that way, it needs to be shut down and talked about another time. This is really for when you are open to hearing who you are, because sometimes we don't know who we are in conflict because we're so flooded, or we're operating from our reptilian brain. We're not actually watching what the other person gets to see. We don't see what the other person sees. And so it's really helpful sometimes to get some feedback, and this exercise is perfect for that. The second part of this then is taking who we are in conflict and creating a set of ground rules. Now, we know what ground rules are. There's, it's in everything. We understand what they are, but relationship ground rules are not typically talked about, right? We don't normally set the bar to understand each other at this level. Unless there is some kind of mediation or therapy that has intervened in your life, you may not have ever talked about some of these things. For some couples, you might not need this, but it's here if you do. So establishing ground rules really allows you both to operate from the same page. It means you are playing by the same rules, because what might be acceptable and normal for one person because of their experience might be very different for another. Right? A person who just says, I'm leaving, I'm walking away, I'm not going to fight with you, might be totally normal, right? To extricate yourself, to, walk away. The other person might see it as abandonment. And so therein lies, a lot of winter potential, because you aren't playing by the same rules. So this ground rule sheet is just an opportunity for us to think about setting the same kinds of rules for both people who are in agreement. Things like, we remember there are two truths, because there isn't one truth. There are always two or more truths to any situation. Now, if you already do this, you can cross that off on the side or put a happy face or two hearts or initial it or something. But if it's something you want to add, if it's something that you notice that you are lacking and it would benefit your relationship, try to add it. Say, you know what? We are going to do this. We are only going to do this one thing. When we get into conflict, we are going to remember there are two sides to every story, and we are going to start there. And we'll see how it goes. And that might just be the game changer for your relationship. That the ground rule that you set was that there are two sides. So that means there are two truths. So there isn't a right and a wrong, a better and a worse, a yes and a no, a perfect and a mess. No, there are two truths. So we need to find a solution that meets two needs. And that's everything for some couples, right? Some other options of ground rules might be, we listen to understand, not just reply. So that might mean, you know what, we're going to practice asking clarifying questions, or we are going to wait a few seconds after the person is done talking before we enter in with a response, so that we really hear what the person said and not just be thinking about our own responses and dismiss all the words that they just said. Maybe you ask clarifying questions without any assumptions. So you might call each other and say, I don't want to assume, so I'm going to ask you a clarifying question. When you said X, did you mean this or did you mean something different? And the person then has the opportunity to say, oh no, I didn't mean that at all. I meant this other thing, right? So asking clarifying questions allows space for you to walk back to summer together, right? So the ground rules are not here to push anybody down or, kind of take control over anybody. It really is where two people can decide what are the rules that we both want to play with. When we're in the sandbox together, what are the rules that are going to define how we do this? Because there's one truck and two people, and we both might want that truck, but how do we work this out, right? And so the ground rules really then becomes an extension of our conflict reactions. So if we, as a couple, tend to get loud and scream over each other and interrupt each other and put each other down and start, kind of poking each other with sharp words, perhaps some ground rules are, one person talks at a time and, we don't interrupt, but we also don't have 10-minute long monologues, right? So we have short sentences and it's more like a ping pong game, than a marathon where one person just talks and talks and talks endlessly. No, it's I talk, then you talk, then I talk, then you talk, and we go back and forth respectfully, right? So there isn't any interrupting, but we also don't talk so long that the person forgot what they wanted to say 3 points ago. We stay in the here and now, no rehashing old issues. This is a huge one when you've been together for a long time and you can, start saying, oh, and then last week you did this and 2 months ago that, and remember in 1984 you did this, right? We can't do that. We're going to stay in the here and now, and that's a ground rule that we set. If we're having a conflict over, something in the house or something in our life, that's the only thing we're discussing. We are not rehashing all the things, right? So if you set that ground rule, then you guys can keep each other accountable. You know what? I would love to talk about what happened 3 months ago, but we're going to solve this first. Let's go back to that one tomorrow. Or let's talk about that at another time because I really want to solve this with you and I want to stay in the here and now. And if that's the ground rule that you set, the other person will be like, oh yeah, we agreed to the here and now. Okay, no rehashing old issues. Okay, good job. Let's get back into it, right? So you're on the same page. You are working together to solve things. And that is the power of this kind of conflict understanding and this ground rule setting. It just creates this safer and cohesive plan moving forward because we know conflict will come back, arguments will happen, fighting will happen, disagreements will happen, core values will be challenged, things will go on in the world, and we will find ourselves on opposite sides. That's normal. What's not as normal is trying to destroy the other person in a conflict, right? We want to get to a healthy place of partnership, and setting healthy ground rules helps us get there. So thank you so much for joining me for this video. Please go through the worksheet and figure out what are your conflict reactions, and then what are some ground rules that directly support the kind of conflict you want to have. It's not going to eradicate conflict. We never can, but we can be better in conflict so we aren't hurting each other or feeling hurt ourselves. Anyway, I will see you in the next video. Thank you for joining me. Take care.